working to dismantle antiquated pictures about our minds and reality, and we're putting it back together in a way that's more consistent with the evidence.
Well, good morning, good evening, good night, good day, wherever you are on the planet. This is John Dupuy, and here we are again with Spiritual Technology 2.0. And we have another amazing person here, but we have Adam Curry with us today. And Adam, welcome. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to read your bio, which I really like a lot. And just to give people an idea who don't know you, who you are, and some of the stuff that you've been working on. So Adam M. Curry is an inventor and a tech entrepreneur in San Francisco. He thinks that the idea of consciousness and reality may be, he thinks the idea that consciousness and reality may be interconnected is really cool. I do too. He was fascinated enough by this idea to organize the project. Technology advances by trying something new, and he's very excited to explore the horizons of consciousness technology. He is a developer of the soon-to-be-launched Entanglement App. He was the recipient of the MIT Ceres Connection Prize at 17 for an invention that converted electro-gravitational phenomena into signals that can be forecast, that can help forecast seismic events such as earthquakes. Adam has been featured in the Discovery channels through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman, and is on the board of the Society for Scientific Exploration. He has worked at Princeton's PEAR Lab and at Psyleron. And I hope I said that right. So Adam, wow, man, you're like off to the races. You started doing this stuff at a very young age. It's very impressive, the work you were doing with the seismic feedback, I guess you'd say it. But why don't you just give us kind of the background story, how, you know, I mean, you still, to me, you seem really young. I don't know how old you are, but you've obviously done a lot and you're a pretty, you know, fascinating person. So how did you kind of vocationally get into science and lead into consciousness, and where you're at now working with the Entanglement app? How'd that all happen?
Yeah, well, thank you for the invite to the conference. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to watching the other talks.
Well, they've been fun. They've been really good.
Have they? I imagine the roster is pretty impressive. So you mentioned the seismic forecasting, and there is actually a chain of connection between spiritual technology on my end and the seismic stuff. So back in like 2000, when I was in high school, I had a friend who brought me to see his dad. And his dad was a guy who was really into the mindfulness products. A lot of the kinds of things, I guess, that many of your guests will be talking about, the mind mirror and Hemisync and that kind of thing. And it just so happened that a book the week before had fallen off the shelf at Barnes & Noble, and it was Super Learning 2000 by Ostrander and Schroeder, which is kind of a seminal book in this field, which talked about using devices to like sort of zap your brain, or like hemispheric synchronization things, or neurofeedback, biofeedback types of things to improve your memory, attention, focus, and learning ability. And something about that just really stuck out to me. I was really fascinated by the idea that we could kind of become smarter, become more mindful, become more focused. And so a week later, I meet his dad, who is a distributor of a lot of these things, synchronicity. So he let me try, I think, the Brain Tuner 5, like Bob Beck's device, and certain of the Hemisync products. I tried it, I think, in my car in the parking lot of his office, and I was immediately plunged into this world of relaxation and inner awareness, sort of for the first time. And from that point, I was really hooked. So that kind of began my interest in what became consciousness. So it's the more fundamental questions. But around that time also, I was introduced to an old scientist who lived in a trailer with a bunch of cats, you know, like you do. And when I went to meet him, his whole trailer was just full of scientific equipment and like badly Xerox theory papers and things like this. And yeah, I had grown up sort of tinkering and building things. So I was like, wow, what's going on here? What are you doing? He said, well, I'm looking at gravity and electromagnetism and how the two can be connected. I was like, oh, interesting. Like I'm kind of learning about that in my physics class in high school. Well, there's physics that you learn in school, and then there's the physics that other people are doing that don't necessarily follow the laws in the textbook. Oh, okay. What do you mean? And he kind of explained that about 100 years ago, there was a period of divergence between what became mainstream sort of classical and quantum physics and this more analog kind of Maxwell torsion field stuff that's becoming really popular again today. And that he was exploring whether or not that could kind of unify the two electromagnetic and gravitational things through devices. Like, wow, this is really cool. And he gave me a paper written by the lead engineer for RCA back in the 80s. It was looking at how capacitors behaved in a different way as sort of the sun and the moon would travel overhead. And he found that they behaved in kind of unusual ways. And sort of cut a long story short, I kind of took that and ran with it. And I built a device that sort of amplified signals in capacitors and then recorded lots of data over about a year and compared that to seismicity, or the frequency of earthquakes, and found that there was a correlation, which I entered in the National Science Fair, and I won that and a lot of other things too. So it was kind of my entree into science. But what that taught me is that anomalies, things like signals in capacitors that shouldn't be there, anomalies are opportunities. And they're opportunities in science in terms of our ability to learn something new. But at the same time, they're also opportunities in technology. So the areas in which that are like sort of not conventional, that other people aren't looking at, are areas of great ripeness when you want to go in and try to build new products or technologies that can do new things. So coming from that perspective that you want to cut ahead of the curve by looking at places where others are too afraid to go, or that are not necessarily predicted by mainstream theories, and then combining my sort of interest with consciousness stuff from back in high school, is more or less where I ended up today, looking at the nature of consciousness and its connection to reality, because we're kind of in the same situation, which we have this mainstream perspective that the mind or consciousness is just an illusion of the brain.
Right.
That almost can't be true.
Mm-hmm.
It actually can't. I mean, it's a logical fallacy to say that it is, but and so we have now this kind of situation where a handful of scientists in the mainstream and a lot of other people have been doing this for a long time are saying, like, no, consciousness is a real thing. And it's creating these new opportunities to do stuff in technology and to do things in more fundamental questions in science. So anyway, that's the long story of how these two things.
Yeah, and it just, you've really got me hooked. It's fascinating. I think we talked about in an early conversation is the basic question, is consciousness foundational or is it peripheral? Is it just, out of the primordial ooze, came cells connected and we have this illusion that you referred to, or is it kind of the ground of being that everything emerges from before the Big Bang to moment? I mean, is it found? And if it is, then science is leasing it out. I mean, how do you have a unified field theory without consciousness?
Well, you can't, because you have to have consciousness to experience anything, including a unified field.
Absolutely. And put that stuff out in some strange way. They're trying to get these basic forces together, and they're leaving. The elephant in the room is like completely ignored. It takes a lot of discipline to pull that off.
Yeah, it's the don't ask, don't tell method of exploring the world around you.
Well, anyway, that is this could be a mini-series. I'm sure it's a very interesting story. But now you're dealing with the Entanglement app, and as I understand it from the little I've seen, it is a way to measure the fact that we are all interconnected as conscious beings. Is that not so?
Well, I mean, you can read between the lines and realize that that's kind of the direction that we're pointing at, but it's more of an exploratory project to kind of look at that very question and maybe try to answer it in new ways. So I don't know if you've heard of the PEAR Lab before. Okay. Well, we're talking about this age-old question about whether or not consciousness is fundamental. Is it an illusion of the brain, or is it something more? And one of the ways that you can try to answer that is to test for the ability of consciousness to do things that shouldn't be possible to do if it were just an illusion. So one would be, can it have an effect on things outside of the body, without touching stuff? Mm-hmm. So does your intention have an effect on the physical world? So the PEAR Labs, it's an acronym. It stands for Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. And it was a laboratory founded by actually the dean of the engineering school, Robert John, in order to test this very thing. So they're famous for setting up this experiment using a physical random number generator. And the random number generator is just this device that's based on atomic decay or electron tunneling, some quantum effect that's intrinsically random. And it produces a series of ones and zeros, right? Like 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0. And you gather a bunch of these ones and zeros together, and you have more or less an equal number of ones to zeros. So everything is right in the universe. Until you get somebody to attempt to affect the machine or the output of the machine using only their thoughts. So you say, pick whether you want to make this machine produce more ones or more zeros, and the person does, and it tends to do that. And the outcome is usually very statistically significant. So that shouldn't happen by conventional science. And it's an effect that is repeatable and has been repeated and is peer-reviewed and all that stuff. So here we have evidence that consciousness is more than just an illusion of the brain, that there is some sort of mysterious deep connection between what's going on in our first-person perspective and the fundamental nature of reality. So this research has been quite popular, like lots of books and documentaries.
Yeah, I've heard of the research. Absolutely.
Exactly. It all kind of comes out of PEAR. And the PEAR spawned the Global Consciousness Project, which is more or less where you have about 60 or 70 random number generators spread around the world that's sending its data to a central place. And they're looking for periods where the network of data starts to become synchronized. There's a covariance, and they found that tends to happen around events that polarize mass world attention. So the events of September 11th, for example, you saw this huge spike in how the RAGs, and New Year's, for example. So the idea there is that you might be able to see something like what Teilhard de Chardin called a noosphere, or a sphere of sort of knowledge or consciousness, a layer of consciousness around the planet. So that is basically my lineage. So I spent some time as an intern at the PEAR Lab when I was younger. And after college, went to Princeton to help start an R&D company called Psyleron, which was sort of based out of that work. And then ended up in San Francisco doing the tech entrepreneur thing. So in that time, more or less in the last 10 years, we've had smartphones come on the stage. And so we're now walking around, with supercomputers in our pockets. And they're all connected, to each other and to the internet. So it's the timing is good anyway to sort of extend this consciousness research in this vein into the world in a big way.
Yeah, the technological noosphere exists now. So now we can test the other one, right?
To put it simply. Mm-hmm. So, the PEAR Lab closed down in 2007, and I had been involved with those guys, Dean Radin and Ions and PEAR and Consciousness for over 10 years, 10 or 15 years. And so there's a bit of a torch passing in a way to a handful of other people that are doing these, and Entangled is one of them. So what is Entangled? So Entangled is a mobile app that you will be able to download in a few months, in March or April of 2016, this year. And when you download it, it turns the hardware in your mobile phone into a random number generator, to a physical random number generator. So again, you get those strings of ones and zeros. And what that allows is the effects due to consciousness to show up on your phone. So it's a way to couple your conscious or subconscious mind to your phone.
So you'll have like a feedback mechanism, so you can actually see what's going on in your head, in your mind.
That's correct.
Okay.
Let's see if I can share this screen really quick.
There we go.
Okay, so this is basically what it's going to look like. The screen on the left, you have this graph, which is a real-time graph of what the numbers are doing. And the idea is that strong deviations from chance may be due or tend to be correlated to events of emotional significance in your life, or an intention to make the device produce more ones or more zeros. What we'll be able to do on the back end is collect data from all of the users and show in real time kind of what collective consciousness might be looking like or doing on a global map. And that would be the third screen.
Mm-hmm.
So what this allows us to do, to kind of bring it back down to earth a bit, is to run massive distributed consciousness research experiments in a way that's never been done before. And to give you an example, there's a lot of groups doing mass meditations these days.
Mm-hmm.
Well, does mass meditation actually work? I mean, does it have an effect on the world? And there's, most groups claim that there is, but it's very difficult to measure it, right? You have to kind of measure it indirectly. Yes, some claim that it reduces crime rates.
Right, I've heard all that, yeah.
Exactly. So you'd have to look at somehow the crime rates in that area due to the meditation, and that correlates with the meditation, and see if there's any change. Maybe, but I think we can do for the first time, really good objective science with this stuff. So let's say that we have a partner organization called Unify, which I think is the largest mass meditation organization. So when somebody downloads the app, they'll be able to opt into a number of different experiments. One would be the mass meditation. So let's say you download the app and you click the button that says opt in, and you'll get a notification that there's a coordinated meditation happening among everyone who's opted into the experiment, say tomorrow at noon. So tomorrow at noon, you'll get a push notification on your phone. It says, begin the meditation and go for 20 minutes. So we'll begin the meditation. When the meditation is finished, we'll be able to analyze the data that's coming from everyone's phone. So let's say we have a couple million people, and 100,000 of them were meditating. We'll be able to look at the results of the data in aggregate before, during, and after. And if there's any significant deviation there, we might be able to say for the first time that we can actually measure in a physical way changes in the world due to mass meditation, which would be really cool.
Very cool. Wow. Yeah, we have a friend, and we also a colleague we worked with for some years, Todd Jason, and he's starting a site called Amplifield to enable this worldwide meditation events. Mm-hmm. And I led guided meditation, I don't know, a couple of months ago. And was in beta. We were just testing it out, but there were just 250 people all over the planet. And it was really powerful. So, I mean, the subjective experience was very powerful. And, we have the anecdotal experience of lowering crime rates and everything. But by giving this an objective map or a mirror to see what we're doing on a massive scale, it's just huge. There's something always important about when you objectify the subjective that just adds a whole depth. It's like having both hemispheres working at the same time. It's just a profound embrace of reality in a deeper way that's been possible before. And
I agree. You're completely right. I think that maybe a lot of what drives us in this field, either trying to bridge science and spirituality by applying the scientific toolkit to spiritual questions, or more in a more niche way, building technologies that facilitate spirituality. I think that a lot of the motivation to do that is the sense of a need for congruence between what we know subjectively to be true and some objective verification. Not necessarily because we need to prove the spiritual dimensions of life to ourselves, but because unless science becomes sensitive to these types of things in some way, then we know that it's always going to be incomplete and it's not going to be fully in service of humankind.
Yeah, it's reductionistic and it's just soul curdling after a while when you leave out, the foundational, what seems to be the foundational reality of the universe. It just doesn't quite work that well.
And it's also operating on fallacies too, which is a problem.
That is a problem.
The idea, for example, of so many, but one is strict replicability of experiments, especially when it comes to sort of human beings. So this is a transpersonal psychology person, but trying to do experiments with human beings and treating them as a variable that never changes, it just doesn't work.
Right.
People are not like these engineering problems. And so when you go to do tests for things like the classical parapsychology tests or this random number generator stuff, you might do 10 experiments in a row and get positive outcomes, but then you'll have somebody else do 1 or 2 experiments and get no results. Does that mean that the whole thing has been falsified? And the answer is no. It's just that people behave differently. So the way that we approach even something as basic as a scientific method we could approach and do science better, I think, if we became more sensitive to the subjective world of the experience.
the subjective, interior, nonlinear, all of that stuff. You know? And if pure science loves things it can saw and quantify and look at and identify.
And that certainly has its place.
It certainly does. It's a half of the universe, Exactly. It's a huge portion, but if you leave out the other, or if you exclusively just do the other and you leave out, you just have these huge holes. It's just a unbalanced, unsatisfying, non-workable paradigm. You have to put together.
I think the reason why I didn't go full bore into science and I kind of diverted into technology is because knowing what I know now about how there's alternative physics and there are alternative psychologies and alternative philosophies, and that you can't really touch them yet in your mainstream educational career.
Absolutely.
I knew that I would just science wouldn't be fun. I know that I really couldn't do it, so I'd have to contribute in some other way.
Yeah, we used to call it rat psych when we were studying psychology. It's like, okay, right. We're going to extrapolate the behavior of these rats, something about humans, and some humans it works really well, actually.
Yeah. And I know this too from my friends who went through and got their PhDs that there is a deep desire for science to be fun and meaningful again, to be exciting. I mean, that's why they would want to get into science in the first place, because it was exciting. So I think that actually this is working in our favor as more and more interesting ideas become more acceptable to study in a mainstream sense. Consciousness is now one of them. Consciousness is the hottest topic in academics. But it's imbuing science with a deeper sense of excitement that's kind of been lacking, I think, in recent decades.
You know, when I was in grad school, I had the total privilege of being Fritjof Capra's graduate assistant. You know, and he was like really a key guy, I think, for a lot of us in bringing, you know, the kind of the mystical, traditional, you know, what the mystics were saying is the nature of reality, and then looking at the quantum world and all the weird things that were coming out of that, and said, you know, they're describing two things from different perspectives and different, you know, different thousands of years apart, but it seems in many ways you're describing the same kind of strange universe that contradicts what we've been kind of given as just objective standard, you know, the Western worldview. And that was like clink. And that started helping me to sew the universe back together again, you know, the inner and the outer, the objective, subjective, the spiritual, the scientific, etc.
Yep. And I think that theoretically we're still kind of at that stage where we know that we're kind of describing the same thing. And that we need to kind of reconcile these two things. What's changed significantly, I think, since you had that moment of realizing that, was that it's becoming okay to talk about this. So I think what's interesting for what we are all doing more specifically, and what this conference is about, is that we're approaching these questions from a technological angle versus a science or theory angle. I mean, science or theory informs what we do, to be sure, but it's maybe one of those kind of unique times in history when the technology pushes the science forward, rather than the science kind of needing to be developed enough to lead to technologies that work on their theories, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So, you know, with Entangled, it's my first stab at what I'm calling consciousness technology, or a very new kind of technology that works by harnessing the connection between the mind and physical reality. So if you have like some of the Venn diagrams of consciousness and the physical world, wherever they overlap at that deep level, whether it's quantum or it's something else, I don't know. But what I'm asking with Entangled is, can we harness that connection and use it to do new and amazing things that we can't really do yet with conventional computer technology? And maybe I can give you a couple of examples. I'll share the screen that might be interesting beyond just the app, right?
Yeah, so the question is, if this is verifiable, then how do we harness this to do good things, you know?
Right. So this was Dr. John from the PEAR Lab. This is what the random number generators used to look like.
Wow.
Here in the blue is what you'd expect, the blue line.
Mm-hmm.
The green line is when people attempt to move the data up with their minds, and the red would be down. So what I'm calling consciousness technology is using a random number generator to show to be kind of a bridge between mind and matter.
Mm-hmm.
So thought-based technology, matter would be more the tech side, your phone, for example, and mind would be consciousness. So here's an early prototype of something we made at Psyleron. And just like the first video game was Pong, more or less,
Mm-hmm.
we created our own version of Pong that's a consciousness technology Pong. And you see this little yellow ball, and the yellow ball would move backwards and forwards in this loop. And it was controlled by a quantum random number generator. So the degree to which you could cause a mean shift in the data, or your psychokinesis, the influence to your mind, the ball would move in that direction. So the goal was to kind of get it all the way around the circle.
And did you find that certain people who have certain skills, healers or meditators, experienced meditators, or people that have been doing some kind of or Tai Chi masters or something, had more capacity to actually affect the random number generators, or was it just kind of random?
We looked at that in the data, and IONS, Dean Radin over at IONS is doing the same kind of investigations. As far as we can tell, first of all, everybody has the ability to do this. It's a feature that's intrinsic to consciousness, not unique to an individual. But some people are better at it than others. The people who are better at it than others, if there was any one thing that you could point to that was saying this causes a person to be better at affecting a random number generator, it's meditation.
Mm-hmm. So this is something that can be trained and improved upon.
I believe it can.
Yeah.
I would go a step further and say that our ability to either affect the world or not affect the world has its roots deep in our subconscious mind. We may have internalized at some point in our life some sort of belief system that enables us to get really strong results, to influence the world in a stronger way, and that more or less enables us to do so. On the other hand, we may have internalized beliefs that this stuff is impossible or wrong, for example, causing us not to get any results or to sabotage our own results, which is really interesting because if you think about it, we're talking about the sweet spot for where beliefs influence reality. You have to be careful about, what the content of your subconscious might contain, because it can work for you or against you in interesting ways.
Yeah, and part of my work, working with clients and students over the years, is because we're using this technology that allows one access into the really depth of the human spirit, the human soul, the place where it connects with everything, but that you start to become conscious of the unconscious stories, and you can see them objectively and go, well, yuck, no wonder I feel so bad about myself, and bad about the world, because that's really a crummy story. And you can start to take that apart and then build a new story that approximates, reality, or a more positive version thereof. And then there may be at a time where you have to undo that one, and go on to something new. But I think that human beings are story oriented. We don't just live in a vacuum of just pure awareness. I mean, we do at times in certain states, but generally, as we move around in the world, our stories are very powerful, and it's important to figure out what they are.
It's incredibly powerful. So I will, speaking of stories, this is an art installation using random number generators that I built with a grant from the city of San Francisco.
That's so cool.
Last April. So this was at Market and Powell. Right downtown San Francisco. Basically what we did is we took 3 random number generators and we had them control a light. So if the RNGs were producing a balanced number of 1s to 0s, the light would glow white. But if it started to deviate, for example, like somebody's mind was influencing it, it would randomly go to one of 8 colors, blue, green, purple. And we put this up in these giant 8-foot tall pods so that you could walk in and stand inside these things and you'd be covered in color. And then on the bottom of the installation, we had a message that just said, think of a color.
Wow.
And so we built these things and we put them on the corner there in San Francisco. And they were super popular. So what happened is that people would see these and they'd walk in and they say, think of a color. And they would think of, for example, blue, and the light would turn blue. And you go like, what is going on here? How is this reading my thoughts? and they'd leave, and someone else would come in and they say, okay, think of a color. How about green? And it would turn green. And we had these up for, I think, 3 days, and there was a line out of them day and night. And there must have been 10,000 people that tried this, and in sort of informal polls, we figured about between 8 out of 10 and 9 out of 10 people, the color turned whatever color they were thinking privately when they walked into it. So,
and that was using the same kind of random number generator technology connected to the colors.
The same thing that's going to be in the phone for Entangled. So this is another example of, this is an example of consciousness technology using random number generators. But what's really interesting about this is that I didn't anywhere indicate that we're using random number generators or that it's using it's a technology that is kind of defying mainstream thinking or mainstream scientific thinking. All I did was say, think of a color. And so the individual had no reason to think that there was anything unconventional happening, which I think resulted in them permitting themselves to have this profound experience. They figured, oh, it must be measuring, it's either a trick or it's measuring some type of body field thing, or, who knows?
Right.
But not that it's unconventional. So, like you were mentioning before, the ability to kind of like tap into story and to become congruent with beliefs is, I think, going to be a feature of this consciousness technology going forward. It's very unlike other technologies that we're used to. The app will be free. And March or April, you'll be able to download it.
Right, 2016, we're now in January.
And we've partnered with Dean Radin and Cassie at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, who'll be doing a lot of the data analysis. We've partnered with Unify and the PEAR Lab and the Global Consciousness Project. So we've got a lot of plans for Entangled in terms of new features that we'll add and alternate ways to explore consciousness. But it's going to kick off with this massive ongoing experiment.
Yeah, well, we'll keep eye awake on your list too, okay? Because we'll send out to our people when our community when this thing is ready. I think people will be fascinated. Probably totally skew your results because these are all crazy meditators, right? But
yeah, that's a good idea. We can get some iAwake people using the app, and then we can compare against those who are not using iAwake, and then just sort of baseline. But that's the kind of fun stuff that we're able to do. That's
extraordinary. That's just terrific.
The model or the inspiration in a way is kind of like the SETI project, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. They had these telescopes pointed into space looking for alien signatures, but they didn't have the computing power to be able to crunch all the data.
Crunch the data, right.
So what they did is develop this little software program that people could download onto their computers. When they're not using their computers, they would crunch the data for the SETI project and send it back.
Oh, that's right. I heard that. Yeah, so that was the early crowd computer idea. Like, we didn't have any computers strong enough, so just put a bunch of computers together and there you have it.
Exactly. And so we're doing the same thing for consciousness. This is like the SETI project for consciousness, where we can ask, is there anything to this collective consciousness? In spiritual or sage circles, there's thought to be a deep connection among all people. Can we measure it?
Yeah.
Can we tap into it in a very sci-fi kind of way? Is it possible to tap into collective consciousness to predict things like earthquakes? So, one experiment we're doing is an earthquake experiment where if you opt into it, when an earthquake happens that fits the criteria, we'll be able to go back and look at the data and say, was there a spike that correlated with it of some significance, and did it happen before? So can we develop a new kind of early warning system for natural disasters? Really, really cutting edge stuff we'll be able to do, but it'll all start sort of with this free app with Entangled.
When you were explaining how matter and mind interconnect, and you placed random event generators at the middle kind of thing. How did we know? I mean, who was working with random event generators, and how did they realize that they were affected by increased coherence, or whatever you want to put it?
So the question would be, how did the Global Consciousness Project come to be, and how were they able to say that the RNGs were affected by increased coherence?
Yeah, like you're kind of tapping into something that people might not know, like, you know, how do we know that random event generators get affected by, or can get affected by coherence, intention, mind, whatever?
Okay. The reason why the PEAR Lab chose random number generators, because it makes doing statistics very easy. So in other words, if there's any influence on the device due to our minds, it's easy to see, and it's easy to calculate scientifically. So, you know, if you had just like a glowing orb or something, and it would glow stronger or weaker based on your intention, you might be able to see it, but how do you sort of objectify that? It's more difficult. But with a random number generator, you know for sure that it's supposed to produce an even number of ones and zeros, basically. And if it's spiking in the direction of a person's intention, like more ones, then it's a very simple calculation to say, okay, the odds of that happening by chance are, you know, 1 in 400. And so we know with a certainty of around 1 in 400 that it was the person's mind that affected the device, and it wasn't just due to chance or some other thing. And then you can do it again and again.
Right. It's not just tested one time on one person. You start accumulating thousands, hundreds of thousands of these examples.
So, and also, there shouldn't be any connection between a person's thoughts and the random number generator, but there is. So that allowed them to say that, okay, well, we think that consciousness is more than just an illusion, but that it has to be, because otherwise, like, illusions can't affect physical devices in the world, right? So that kind of allowed them to sort of test this idea to begin with, is whether or not our minds are just like sort of ghosts in the machine, or whether or not we're having an experience of something that is more intrinsically related to the sort of fundamental nature of the world. If that makes sense.
And for example, you know, the work that they're doing at HeartMath Institute by measuring what we call field coherence, or maybe places in which coherence has also been increased by many different factors. Do you think your app could also become some sort of measuring device for coherence?
I think that the app could become a measurement device for coherence. I'm kind of theory agnostic. I think that smarter people than me are going to have to come up with the theory and the vocabulary for describing what's really going on when you're talking about people influencing their phone and millions of people influencing their phones to create this living network of global consciousness. Entangled is going to be more of like an experiment, ongoing experiments. So we don't actually know if it's sort of coherence among people or what's really going on. I mean, that's probably what's going on. But yeah, I think that's what the Global Coherence Initiative at HeartMath has produced would probably show effects similar to what Entangled will show. Take it a step further, and what is the ultimate goal? For me, the ultimate goal here is I want to create the consciousness layer of the internet. The internet is broken into different layers, right? You have the sort of physical layer of the fiber optic cables, and then you have the social layer, right, which is Facebook, and the location layer, which would be Yelp or Foursquare or something. And a level 1 or 2 abstracted above that would be the consciousness layer, which is this real-time collection of data that's being affected by individuals in the network, affected by consciousness or individuals in the network. And with that, we'll be able to do all kinds of cool stuff, not just have a sort of live picture of sort of global consciousness, if you will, or coherence, but also be able to do things with it. So we can release an API that allows artists to build art installations that change color or do things according to what global consciousness is doing. We have partnered with a couple of big musicians to do feedback during their concerts. So, if you go to a concert that's really good, there's this tangible feeling that you're, part of a group, that there's there's an energy or sort of like a magic, if you will.
Absolutely.
Can we measure that? And what can we go a step further, and can we tap into that and use it to drive the lighting display of a concert? That's something that we're planning to do for some big concerts coming up in 2017. So that's kind of the idea, the consciousness layer of the internet. More than just, we have to start somewhere just by showing that, okay, here's a graph of, coherence or consciousness, but the sort of killer app, or the ultimate goal, is to actually do something useful and cool.
Well, I this thing that I don't like large concerts unless I'm on stage playing. And then that sounds really narcissistic, and maybe it is, but there is such an amazing energy field that musicians get, when you're playing and that loop is going on. It is so palpable and it's so powerful that keeps musicians going back and still doing it, even though the music business sucks and it's all changed, and how do you make money out of this, on, and just all the, the pitfalls are huge. And so few people ever reach the superstar thing, while there's massive amounts of really talented people and not so talented, but it's that energetic thing. If you could measure that, that could be, God knows what you could do with that data to extrapolate into other fields also and see what we're really doing with our minds.
Well, I can tell you what I'm going to do with it. I'm going to give it away. I'll make tools that make it very easy for people to use and tap into, and other creators can just build whatever they can imagine on top of it. So we'll make that available to people. Yeah,
and so whatever you want to give away, give to us, and we'll give it to our list and our communities to support you in what you're doing.
Okay. Well, we have a list of beta testers that are going to get early access to Entangled. So the spiritual tech and iWake people, I'd be happy to allow them to jump on the list.
That would be terrific.
And get it ahead of time.
Great.
Are there any other ways that you can imagine in which I can kind of tie, I'm speaking in very abstract and general terms, about an app and how it works. It's not even available yet. But is there any way that I could tie Entangled or the RNG stuff more to kind of tie it back to spiritual tech somehow, or is there anything that seems missing?
Well, that's a great question. It would be really interesting to conduct experiments now that we have, we have these massive worldwide meditation networks through the internet, like Amplifield and the one that you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And what if we would, do things like using certain entrainment tracks, people all over the world that just take you down in these deep brainwave states, these coherent states because of the vibrational frequency of the sound, and measure that with, the RNG, so it is, what is regular just kind of meditation, thinking about it together, and what is like enhanced meditation? Do we see, a larger spike? Do we see some more powerful variation? That would be amazing.
That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
The random number generators from laboratories in just recent decades weighed like 40 pounds and cost $100,000.
Right.
They were based on radioactive decay. And at Psyleron, we got that down to a few $100s using electron tunneling, sort of quantum effect. But now it'll be more or less free in your phone. So the ability for people to do kind of ad hoc experiments, and if not formal experiments, then sort of armchair investigations, I think is going to produce some really interesting effects. One of which is, can we take many of these spiritual technologies, the entrainment devices or sound healing, that kind of thing, and kind of do before and after conditions and see, does it impact a person such that their ability to affect a random number generator, and I guess therefore reality, have any effect on them? Lots and lots and lots of interesting work.
Yeah, and of course it has all kinds of implications, philosophical and ethical implications. If that is so, then therefore how should we lead our lives? And the Abraham Maslow always said the work that you do on yourself is the work that you do on the world, which is it's brilliant, right? It obviously works on some levels, but if you could see, actually there was this connective tissue or field of human consciousness that's actually affected when we do the meditation, when we do the work, when we put our good intentions out there in the world, for actually measurable effects, that would just clinch the argument, wouldn't it? That would just be a very powerful indicator of how we should conduct our lives.
I think so. There's always this question of scale. So we can we can shift probabilities in some small way of quantum particles and how they affect. But one question that we need to ask is, how does that relate to our ability to affect macroscopic things in our world? And it's only in the past decade or so that things like quantum biology have become mainstream. So we're seeing the ability of cells to respond to quantum signals. So can we influence our own body through this mechanism, right? Presumably if we can influence a random number generator, we can influence other nanoscopic probabilistic processes in our own body. Right? So is this kind of leading the way towards medical applications, or at least an improved understanding of things like the placebo effect? And if devices can help us get into a state of mind in which we can better visualize or remain more positive, the compounding effects on our body could be profound. And we might now start to be seeing a mechanism emerge that can explain how all this stuff is working.
Perhaps what they've been missing in the unified field theory. Maybe if you clunk this thing in here, you could really have the potential to have something that works along those lines, or at least closer to it, eh?
Yeah.
So what do you see, 10, 15 years from now, just if you were projecting the future? And I know technologically that's so incredibly impossible. Who would have predicted, 10 years ago, we'd be living in the iPhone age, if you will. So, so I'm sure you've thought about this, and what have you brought back from that kind of futuristic journeying?
Well, I think that we're only on the very beginning of the exponential uptrend in interest and adoption of what you might call spiritual technologies. I think you'll see consciousness, the question of what consciousness is and its connection to reality, being penetrating more and more sort of academic fields or silos. And I think that we'll, in the next 10 years, see a gold rush in terms of new, well, let me give you an example. In the pharmaceutical industry, it's dominated by this better living through chemistry thinking from the 50s, right? Got a problem, take a pill. But what is chemistry, or it works in the body in a certain way, right? Well, can we reproduce those effects with electric devices? And the answer is, of course. There's no technical reason why we couldn't reproduce the effects of a chemical drug with an electronic device. And I've come to learn that there's substantial amount of new interest in what's called electroceuticals, even on the part of big pharma, because you can reproduce many of the effects without complications and side effects.
Absolutely.
So that's one example of where I think we're going to be going in the next 10 years. We will, I think industry, probably ahead of academics, will see the potential of the kinds of stuff that we're working on, whether it's sound healing or electroceuticals or sort of consciousness tech stuff, and really develop them into a sort of like robust product offering.
I hope God is listening to you right now, Adam.
Sorry?
I said, I hope God is listening to you right now. Because this is exactly what needs to happen. So, if you pull any strings,
Yeah.
I've often said that if we had an experimental drug was getting the results that we're finding just keep coming back from this brain entrainment technology, there would be hundreds of millions of dollars poured into it. But what you're saying is that it's beginning to shift. It's beginning to open up into electroceutical and consciousness. What are we going to call this? Consciousness expanding. It sounds like the 60s. And maybe this is the LSD of the 21st century. And hopefully we will, we've learned a little bit and it won't have all the negative possible side effects. We haven't seen it in our work anyway.
Yeah. Generally it's not there. You only get the negative side effects, or in general, you get the negative side effects when you're forcing the body to accept usually some type of like chemical or surgical procedure. But I think that one thing that's kind of interesting about what we're doing is that we're kind of trying to work more with the body's natural sort of system.
Sure.
And its own intelligence, which means that the likelihood of complications is reduced quite a bit.
Yeah.
Also, these devices, they provide a pretty profound first-person experience, which I think can get people along the path of like asking spiritual questions and kind of developing their own spirituality. I don't know what it is exactly, but there's some connection between sort of the sound stuff and the electric stuff that situates you more as like this kind of not just a meat machine, but something more, right?
Right.
So, not to mention promotes things like meditation. So I think that we'll see in the future also a great deal more sort of meditation and taking of that subject seriously. Hopefully meditation would make its way into schools or hospitals. Probably the single most important thing that hospitals, patients can do to recover is meditate.
No kidding. Yeah.
The single most important thing that students can do, whether it's for focus or stress relief or whatever, is meditate. Across the board, you're seeing meditation being
accepted in the mainstream now like never before. It's been amazing the last couple of years.
Yeah.
All over the place.
In Silicon Valley, many of your top CEOs are meditating. Most of your companies are offering yoga or meditation programs. And it works.
Yeah, absolutely.
So more of that.
Well, Javi, did you have anything you wanted to wrap up with? A question or comment?
I was thinking again about what you said about the apps, kind of, or your intention of trying to tap into this magic that sometimes you get when you're in a live gig or something. And I was just thinking, well, if you create this magic meter, you're in for a huge one because things are going to change amazingly.
Yeah.
If you could practice, imagine if you could go to if you're sampling maybe types of yoga, you go to one class and you read all the data when you go back home, and then you go to another one and you realize that you were actually maybe more enhanced by one practice than another, or there's many zillion things that could arise. It's amazing.
Yeah, you can have sort of a meter for things that work for you, if you will. If you relate to the app as something that can tell you or give you feedback about things that work for you or are appropriate, then it will do that. In my experience, so you can use it as an auditing tool.
Yeah, I think at some point you could even measure what's going on by those of you who are working together and to intentionally create this technology. What is that doing to the field?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Anyway, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.